What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you, and one that I've been kind of low-key anticipating because this is the first album in quite a while from this band. So today we are going over the latest offering from Dååth, the Deceivers. This comes out on the 3rd of May on Metal Blade Records. This band formed in 2003 in Atlanta, Georgia. And they have kind of an interesting timeline. They put out 4 albums. I believe one was on Roadrunner, then they were on Century Media. And then around 2013, the band ended up essentially becoming Chimera. Chimera, all the members left, and it was just Mark Hunter, and they became the entire backing band for a point. They did the album Crown of Phantoms, and then the same year, Dååth officially broke up, and I think Chimera did. And yeah, this band has just kind of been, defunct for a while up until 2022 when the band resurfaced again. So this is their 5th album overall and the first in 14 years. And in terms of like describing this band, I mean, honestly, like almost every album's different. So it's kind of hard. Like, I've heard melodic death metal, I've heard groove metal. They kind of fit in that whole like modern American metal thing that, I guess like Lamb of God was kind of a part of, and like bands like God Forbid and Shadows Fall. Like, it was when we didn't want to call bands metalcore. So we didn't also want to call them groove metal either because we already used that in the 90s, so we thought of something else. But yeah, Dååth kind of fit in there.
Yeah. I think I got into him back when Kevin Talley was in the band because I was a fan of Kevin Talley's work in Dying Fetus, and then he was in Chimera, and I was like, ooh, here's another band that he's in. I'm going to check this out. And that's kind of when I fell into it. So probably somewhere around like 05, 06.
Yeah.
I think is when I first heard this band. And I'll be honest, I didn't really listen to more than an album or so. And then I was just kind of like, whatever. And now we're back.
My timeline's kind of the same. I got into them with their second album, The Hinderers, and I thought it was really solid. Then The Concealers came out, and that one featured new vocalist and current vocalist Sean Zatorsky, and it was way more thrashy, and like they kind of stripped out a lot of the keyboard effects on that one. And then their self-titled album that came out in 2010 was even more vicious, like even more fast-paced, almost kind of grindy in spots. And kind of following along that whole line of every album being different, this album is vastly different from the previous ones. Now, from the last album, this only features 2 original members from that lineup, longtime guitarist E.L. Levi and Sean Zatorsky. On drums now, we have Karim Lechner, formerly of Decapitated, currently in Septic Flesh. Rafael Trujillo does a majority of the lead guitars on here. He is formerly of Obscura, so that kind of makes him very qualified to do lead guitar. And this band also features second guitarist Jesse Zaretti. I forget what bands he's actually from, but a lot of fresh faces on this one. And honestly, like listening to this again, very different from their last album and the album before that and the album before that. But I will say that this is probably the biggest sounding album that they have made.
I mean, it could be in part to the fact that it's mixed and mastered by both Jens Bogren and Tony Lindgren, who are known for their big, lavish productions. Yeah, if you want a big sounding record, that's the duo I would pick.
That is definitely probably a reason. Also, just like sonically and musically, it is just a bigger sounding album. There are more epic melodies to pair off with the just flat out chuggy death metal that's on here. And this one brings back a lot of the synths, except they're different than they were, like, say, on the Hinderers. Like, there were a little bit on the Concealers, but the Hinderers notably had more synths. This sounds like less industrial-ish and more along the lines of like orchestral synths. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say a couple of songs in here sound very similar to Septic Flesh, like namely Hex Unending. Like that could be a flat out Septic Flesh song. Also, Unwelcome Return, there's like a big horn section in the beginning. This band is, again, like they're embracing some different stuff, at least from the past. They've had like a very dense, heavy sound before, but in comparison to their other albums, like this feels less focused on, so much like the riffs and like the heavy grooves and such. It's way more focused, I would say, on a lot of the atmosphere and holy smokes, the lead play. The lead play on here is nuts.
Yes, it is. In fact, every track, I started to write down leads. I was like, oh, that was really good. That was really good. Every single track on this record has a blazing awesome lead on it. And it has some heavy hitters, too, as far as that is concerned. Dean Lamb, Pierce Nilsson, Mark Holcomb from Periphery, and then, of course, Jeff Loomis, who is Jeff Loomis. I mean, you don't get any better than that.
And even when it's not those distinguished gentlemen, it is, I believe, Rafael Trujillo, which he's doing an amazing job on here. And part of like the lead play that has at least been in the past with this band has always been more neoclassical. So in a way, the orchestral elements kind of fit because you have a lot of harmonies that sort of play off of that. A song like With Desire, which honestly has probably some of the biggest melodic hooks on the song. When the orchestral elements come in, they're doing harmonies along that. So you have like layered guitar harmonies on top of what sounds like strings and maybe horns in the background. Again, it's synthesized. It's no one like listed in terms like violin players or horn players or cello players or anything like that. But it is interesting to hear them sort of harmonize along these lines. And, you know, this band is very melodic, but most of their stuff is just very intense. Like, even when they are doing something notably more melodic, it isn't like, you know, At the Gates or like In Flames or anything like that. Like, it is done with like absolute ferocity.
And most notably, that intensity can be found on songs like Ascension and Purified by Vengeance, which are just chock full of nasty riffs, and they get more intricate too, especially when you get down to Purified by Vengeance. That song, you can tell just the riffing goes from like a more simple stomping pattern or just chugs that you'd find in the rest of the songs and gets like super riffy. There's a really cool ascending riff that's in Purified by Vengeance.
Yeah, a good chunk of this I could say you could compare to like technical death metal bands. Like, there's a lot of intricacy in the riffs, but it's a lot more focused on the melody rather than just being like intricate and like look how many notes I can play, which the answer is a lot for this band because, you know, every note is heard. But with these symphonic elements and that sort of like layering in there, there's a lot of comparisons you could draw to like Dimmu Borgir, especially in the more sinister moments, like Deserving of the Grave and the last track Into Forgotten Dirt, or even a band like Veil of Panath too. There's a lot of that, you know, interplay between the keyboards and the intricate riffing, but I like the fact that this band will just flat out get down and dirty and just deliver huge chuggy riffs and occasionally just kind of strip back that layer of the orchestral elements. Ascension's a really good example of that. Like, it just stomps in double time grooves. The riffs are sinister, they are angry as hell. It's a very explosive sounding song. And Purified by Vengeance, that one has like a really good contrast between the chorus and the verses. The verses are brutal as hell.
Yeah,
like,
they are.
You almost get kind of like a slam chug sort of groove to them. But when you get down to the chorus, it's very epic and soaring. You have, again, those orchestral elements that come in, but they actually feel like very welcome just because it's a contrast from the verse.
And they're toned down a little bit too. Like, there's a lot of big open lead melodies in Purified by Vengeance too. Like, the synths kind of sit in the background a little bit and let the guitars come out and play. And it's a really cool contrast between how heavy the verses are to how open and clean and beautiful the chorus is.
Yeah, and the guitars definitely come out to play often. In fact, I would say that not only are there just like long extended lead sections, but sometimes they will drop out to like a bridge transition into another lead. Ascension does that one, and honestly, it was like, dude, I get a two-piece here? All right.
I mean, why have a one-piece meal when you can have a two-piece meal? And like we said, too, the lead work is excellent, so I don't mind when you get treated to multiple leads.
And they make good use of their guests. Like, their guests on here are top-tier guys. Like, Per Nilsson comes in, shreds his ass off. Definitely plays more along the lines of like the neoclassical style that's on here, and that's not just in the leads, that's also in the riff work too. In fact, there's a lot of like synth settings that almost sound like harpsichords. So I mean, that kind of fits because I mean the atmosphere in here is strange because a lot of it is neoclassical, but there's also like some cosmic little sci-fi blurps that pop up, and even some more like gothic horror elements, especially like on the last two. But the big standouts for me in terms of the guests were probably Mark Holcomb on Purified by Vengeance. He has a lead that really stands out because it is less neoclassical than a lot of the other ones.
Yeah, the phrasing on his lead is really just smooth and nice and tasteful and less about noodlies and more about feeling.
Yeah, it's also a little bit more aggressive. Like, there's some like nasty squealies in it, and it kind of fits the song, or at least like the verses on it. Like, this one's just, you know, intended to be like the kind of uglier solo, but it's still very tuneful. But the big one, is Jeff Loomis, and they lead him in such grand fashion. Deserving of the Grave is very dark and sinister to begin with. Like, it's just a more gothic tinged sound. It feels more evil, like there's fog over a cemetery. There's a little bit of black metal to it, I would say, too. And there's lots of cool layered melodies, savage riffs, and then it drops out into this swell of gothic synths, and I don't know, a moment that I would call like Dracula opening his coffin and all the fog pours out, but out comes Jeff Loomis. And they just roll out the red carpet for him. Like, he just flat out owns, like, that is the perfect way to build into a lead by Jeff Loomis. Like,
I mean, he's Jeff Loomis.
Yeah.
You know?
No disrespect to any other guests. I'm sure they love them, but they're like, oh no, we got Jeff Loomis. Like, oh man, we're going to bow at the altar for this guy. And I really like the fact that Deserving of the Grave and Into Forgotten Dirt are essentially one song. And it kind of makes sense, and the way they follow one another, it's kind of life imitating art there. But yeah, it continues along that more dark, sinister, kind of gothic sort of sound there with the synths and such, with some heavy syncopated breakdowns. And there's tons of just heavier than hell, chuggy, kind of decapitated level syncopation scattered all over here.
I mean, again, part of that comes too from Krim's drum work. He's a beast of a drummer anyway, and really always has been. I've followed that guy since his YouTube days. The way he takes these riffs and kind of just plays with them, like every now and again his beat pattern will change, and it's so fluid and smooth that you don't really notice it until you're midway through the groove and you're like, oh, that's something different. There's this cool part right before the bridge in Deserving the Grave where they're doing kind of like this Gojira riffy section thing. It's got the weird like pick slides in it and whatever, but there's a bunch of different accented parts in there. In fact, there's so many that I think it caught both of us. There's just one part in that song where you're kind of grooving along, and then there's so many like changes in the riff or the accent that it's a bunch of like little stuttered accents. And he does this really cool hi-hat part in there that just kind of makes it kind of bouncy and like kind of sexy for a second.
On Welcome Return, too, that's got like this fun, like, I would just call it like kind of a stomping boogie. Like, it's just single kick and just like, you know, I don't know, just trying to get your butt shaking a little bit. Now, as I said, this is their biggest album, and it comes out in a lot of different ways. You know, the drum work is absolutely insane in here. The production's huge. The guitars might be thicker and heavier than they've been before, but it also comes through in all of the symphonic and orchestral elements. And I will admit, while this does complement a lot of the neoclassical play that's on here, it can also be a bit much. In fact, I would say like almost every bit of empty space is soaked up by all the orchestral elements that are on here. And at a certain point, it kind of feels a little too overloaded by those elements to the point where it kind of takes away from the music and kind of buries the riffs.
Yeah, that was my problem too. Like, I'm on the wall nowadays about at least orchestral synths in music, but when they do things like overpower your riffs, or especially when things get more intricate, and then you get this orchestral synth that is supposed to harmonize, but it ends up taking over the riff, and it's sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's just the tones that they're using or the sounds that they're using, but like, if you're going to do that, I would at least dial it back a little bit so it doesn't kill what else you're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of sections on here where those orchestral elements just come through way too loud, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on underneath it. But again, they do complement the music at least. Like, this isn't like Lorna Shore where they just kind of played the soundtrack to Lord of the Rings behind a bunch of blast beats and chugs. Like, there's stuff going on that is more intricate and it's more thought out, but at the same time, it kind of just grandstands too much. Maybe the mindset was like, hey, we have been gone for a long time and we want to come back loud and epic and huge. And they most definitely did, but there's a lot of songs on here where I feel like if you stripped out a lot of the orchestral parts, or at least kind of muted them a bit, you might have some stronger songs. Like, two of my favorites on here, Ascension and Purified by Vengeance, are partially my favorites because the symphonic elements are played down a little bit. Like, they kind of wait until the chorus on Purified by Vengeance to really let those moments shine. And because it hasn't been a huge part of the rest of the song, when they come in, it's like, ooh, that's kind of refreshing. That's a cool dynamic. The rest of the time, it can be kind of a din, and, you know, it kind of puts a hamper on songs like No Rest, No End, Hex Unending. Silent Foray, I did like that one, but again, the symphonic elements were a bit much. And then there was kind of the weird end.
Yeah, the weird end where everything kind of drops out for a minute and you think it's over, and then it just kind of swells back into not even a reprise of the riff. It's like a whole different part, and then it just jumps into a breakdown. But it's like that whole second part that comes in out of nowhere almost has nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah, it's just this like noisy industrial soundscape. And you're like, all right, well, I mean, if it ends on this, that's, that's fine. That's like a little bit of atmosphere at the end. But it just goes into this, kind of feels a little like tacked on Meshuggah breakdown. Mm-hmm. And while it's like not bad, it's just, why is it there?
Yep. And that song too, that was another time the synths kind of ticked me off, because in the beginning of the Silent Foray, the riff that they're playing is actually really kind of thrashy, but the synths drown it out. And so, like, if you hadn't had synths there, you would have had this big thrashy beginning, and that would have been cool, because there's nothing like that, riff-wise at least, that appears on the rest of the record.
So yeah, while this wasn't exactly what I was expecting from the band, I still do enjoy it for the most part, so I'm going to go ahead and give us 3.5 stars. I like most of this. I just think the symphonic elements need to be just turned down a little bit. It does complement the music because, again, this band is noted for like a lot of neoclassical leads. Like that's kind of always been one of their things. And having those synth settings does kind of work. It's just a little bit too much. It kind of crowds the album. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of elements that I would like to hear kind of, outshine those synths a bit, like namely the riff work, because the riff work is intricate, brutal, but also melodic. Like, they have a great sweet spot between all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. The drum work, I think, is excellent. Sean sounds great on vocals. He has great cadences, a good high and low delivery. There's a lot of cool stuff that I like about this album, but I just think they maybe tried to just do a little bit too much. And it does kind of bog this album down with just a lot of extras. But overall, I mean, if you're a big fan of Septic Flesh, Decapitated, a little bit of Dima Borgir, honestly. Like, I get a bit of that. Veil of Panath, stuff like that. Definitely check this out. Pretty solid album.
I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3. When the riffs hit, they are really good. In fact, I think riff-wise, it gets better as the record goes on. You get into songs like Ascension and With Ill Desire, Purified by Vengeance, Deserving the Grave. Like, those all hit really hard. The drum work is excellent. The lead work is superb. I mean,
yeah.
What do you expect? I mean, you get a list of heavy hitters like that, plus you get your main guitarist anyway from Obscura. You're kind of betting 1,000 anyway with your guitar lineup. They've been away for a little while, so naturally I think when you come back, you want to be a heavy hitter and whatnot. For me, look, I'm picky with synths and music anyway, and if you're gonna do it, that's fine, but for me, don't put it so out front. I don't know. I think for me, I just am not a big fan of orchestral synths. Even though neoclassical music definitely alludes to using more orchestral synths, just for me, every time I heard it, I was just like, man, it kind of killed the riffs for me. And even the groove at times. It's just, I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know. Outside of those synths, it's a pretty damn good record. If you're a fan of, again, Decapitated and bands like Surreption and Alluvial and Veil Panath and Chimera even. I would still say there's Chimera influence in here. You definitely want to check this out. Regardless if you've been a fan of this band for years, they are back. I would recommend checking out the record anyway. So yeah, give it a spin.
So, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon if you'd like to help us out there. There's a link down below to thrallsofmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also in our channel up in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But, if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size. And we even have hats, too, so if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
And as always, thank you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for being fans of Thralls of Metal. We couldn't do this without you guys. It turns this channel from 2 dickheads in a basement doing reviews to 2 dickheads in a basement doing reviews that also have people that watch. So that's cool. But yeah, we appreciate you. Tons of content coming your way. Album reviews, discography rankings. We're probably going to cover a bunch of live shows since MDF is coming up, and that's going to be insane.
Yeah, watch for a bunch of shorts from that one, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm certain. I got to actually clear off my phone. I have 2.5 gigs worth of space left on my phone. Shut your mouth.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for literally everything you guys do. Again, tons of content coming your way. I don't know what else to say other than probably one more big thank you.
Thank you.
Because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.